of his firefighter example, one should consider that this choice involves neither legal implications nor the trampling upon of someone's rights. The firefighter's job is foremost to save the lives of people in danger of burning and therefore to save as many lives as possible. Thus, it is perfectly sensible that the firefighter should choose to save the lives of 5 as opposed to saving 1 life. However, in consideration of the ticking time bomb scenario, while the interrogator's job is to save as many lives as possible, his job is also to uphold the law. Thus, when apprehending a suspect, he must always treat the suspect as innocent until proven guilty. In this case, trampling upon his rights by inflicting punishment upon him in no way constitutes upholding this statute. Further, whereas the choice of the firefighter would not involve any further legal implications, the torturing of a suspect would in fact have such implications. It would imply that a suspect of any nature can be treated as guilty until proven innocent. For example, in the case of a serial killer, an interrogator would, by nature of John's argument, be given the right to torture a suspect thought to know the whereabouts of a missing victim or suspected of planning a massive attack on the population. There would, in this case, be almost no way to draw the line as to when torture would and would not be appropriate. In fact, the choice of the firefighter is a personal one, whereas the choice of the interrogator is one of much further implications that could not be put forth as precedent. Second, John contends that to fail to torture the ticking time bomb terrorist and thus fail to save thousands of lives would be to thwart the legitimacy of government. On the contrary, to torture the terrorist would do just that. Basic civil rights give the terrorist the right not to be punished on the assumption of guilt. Thus, it can only be seen that the abandonment of these principles would lead to a complete trampling of constitutional law. Any citizen in understanding of the workings of the law could not see the prevention of torture in this case as thwarting of the government's legitimacy. It in fact would strengthen the legitimacy by showing that the government upholds its standards even in the greatest state of emergency. After all, that is the purpose that the law is meant to fulfill.
The opposition clearly stated that we should prioritize the civil liberties of Americans. Me and my partner cannot agree more. That is why we have argued for the proper legal regulation of torture in the ticking bomb case. The opposition clearly mentioned its fears of the excessive role of government. Who then would be able to protect the rights and well-being of American citizens that the opposition advocates, if not the government? Terrorism is a truly unique threat, and we must not hesitate to deter and effectively deal with potential dangers that may harm American citizens. Thus, the proper legal regulation of torture, led by the President and knowledgeable national security officers and judges, would allow for a legitimate and transparent way to deter terrorists in a potential ticking bomb case, as me and my partner have previously stated. In the case of falling prey to the slippery slope, I have already addressed such unfounded concerns. The ticking bomb case was outlined by my partner John, and it is perfectly evident that such legal regulation of torture would follow the strictest of guidelines in order to maximize the benefits in protecting American lives and minimize the costs in having to resort to torturing terrorists only when they have in fact threatened the lives of Americans. The main goals of proper legal regulation of torture are to deter potential terrorists by having a structure and procedure for dealing with them when they have threatened the lives of Americans, and for the American public to feel more secure about their personal safety. Furthermore, the apparent distrust in the American government's capability to abide by certain guidelines evident in the opposition's constructive is misguided. The American government has the ability and integrity to protect the rights and personal safety of endangered Americans by implementing a proper regulation of torture in the ticking bomb case. Furthermore, when faced with the gut-wrenching decision to either prioritize the rights of criminals or the rights of innocent American citizens, me and my partner have advocated and continue to advocate the prioritization of the rights of Americans. The true danger, as I said before, lies in falling susceptible to a slippery slope, in placating and appeasing to terrorists. That is not an option that me and my partner are willing to advocate, as it truly tarnishes American legitimacy and integrity and may lead to more terrorist attacks since they will have increased political leverage. In closing, the prioritization of innocent Americans over those of terrorists, followed by the cost-benefit analysis that my partner described, and the prioritization of the peace of mind of the American public, as well as deterring future terrorist attacks, has proven that we have advocated and proven the regulation of torture is justified in the ticking bomb case. Thank you.
While Daniel's argument for the justification of torture in a ticking bomb case is plausible, it fails in the sense that his entire argument assumes that there can be regulation for torture. The major problem is figuring out how to regulate torture in the first place. With a country that is so divided on an issue such as torture, how do regulations go about developing? It is one thing for there to be a system in place for developing laws, and it is quite another for laws and regulations to actually be passed. Perhaps views on torture would be more consistent throughout the population if this was a single-party government system, but it is not. Whichever way you look at it, a consensus on one way to regulate torture would be very near impossible. The range of possible opinions is very wide, and with so many different opinions, to obtain a majority of votes to even pass a bill from one house of Congress to the other would be impossible. The system of checks and balances in place already makes it much more difficult for our country to pass laws and legislations in comparison to other countries, and to be able to approve any kind of regulation for a topic such as torture is even less likely. Since this is the case, the only other option for torture to be used would be in the off-the-books manner, and this would then lead to a slippery slope, which I discussed in my proposition. This being the case, Daniel's justification for torture fails because it doesn't take into account that the regulation of torture itself is an issue and makes the assumption that there is regulation and that there is no slippery slope, which is not the case. Daniel also argues that having regulations in place, if we suppose that there could be regulations, would help deter future terrorists from committing such crimes. However, it is not as though terrorists think now that if they commit such acts, there would be no consequences for their actions. I think that they are fully aware that if caught, they face major consequences, and so if not deterred by what is already in place, although it may be after the fact, it is likely that these are determined terrorists who would not be scared or intimidated by any laws. Therefore, we have to have regulations for torture. Were we to have regulations for torture, I doubt that it would have any deterrent effect on them. What results is those terrorists are neither deterred, nor is the elimination of a slippery slope through regulation possible without getting by the obstacle of actually being able to pass regulations to begin with.
Good debate.
It's good, VJ? Okay, you have the timer. Can you start it? Hello, good afternoon to all of you. My name is Rob Margolis, and I'm here with my partner Travis Roberts to debate the question of whether the primary purpose of lawmaking should be efficiency. Travis and I affirm this proposition and will seek to convince you over the next half hour of why we are correct. When analyzing a statement such as the primary purpose of lawmaking should be efficiency, we must note that it is explicitly a normative claim about how the law ideally ought to operate rather than a positive claim about how the law actually operates. We are not saying that the law is necessarily efficient. Instead, we are saying that lawmakers continually ought to strive to maximize efficiency. We would like to begin our argument by defining the key words listed in this debate topic. We define primary as the central point of something, purpose as the objective of something, lawmaking as the act of creating a system of laws, a system of rules intended to improve the well-being of society, should as how the law ideally ought to operate, and efficiency as meaning that we get what we want or value most highly, whether that be time,